Who was the richest human being in the ancient world? It feels like a simple question. Picture a pharaoh buried under 100 kilograms of gold. Picture a king with granaries, palaces, and armies. Somebody, somewhere, must have been the wealthiest person alive. But if you go far enough back, the question stops making sense. Because for almost the entire history of our species, being rich was not difficult. It was not rare. It was impossible. Not impossible because there was nothing valuable in the world. Impossible because the people around you would not allow it. For roughly 300,000 years, humans lived in a way where accumulating more than everyone else was actively, deliberately, and sometimes ruthlessly prevented. Our ancestors had a system for stopping rich people from existing. And the strangest part is that the system is still running inside you right now. So who was the first rich human? And what happened to the world that made them possible? Let's start with the obvious problem. You cannot be rich if you cannot carry your wealth. For most of human history, people moved. Hunter-gatherer bands followed animals, seasons, and water. Everything you owned had to be carried on your own body, by you, over long distances, again and again. So your possessions were limited to a few tools, some clothing, maybe a container, and some jewelry. In that world, owning extra stuff is not a status symbol. It is a burden. Imagine hoarding 50 spears when you have to personally carry all of them across a valley. Wealth, in the way we understand it, was physically pointless. And there was a second, bigger problem. Food does not wait. If you kill a large animal, you have hundreds of kilograms of meat and no refrigeration. Within days, most of it will spoil and be worth nothing. You literally cannot save it. So the value in that carcass has to be used immediately or lost entirely. Anthropologists call societies like this immediate return systems. You get food, you consume it, you start again tomorrow. And here is the crucial consequence. If you cannot store anything, you cannot accumulate anything. And if you cannot accumulate, you cannot become rich. The economics simply do not permit it. But this is where the story gets genuinely surprising. Because it turns out our ancestors did not just rely on the environment to keep everyone equal. They enforced it themselves. On purpose. With rules. The anthropologist Richard Lee, who spent years living with the Wishu-Hawansi people of the Kalahari, described them with a phrase that has stuck ever since. He called them fiercely egalitarian. That word fiercely is doing a lot of work. They were not equal by accident. They were equal because they worked at it, constantly. They would not tolerate boasting, showing off, or anyone acting superior. And they had a whole toolkit of techniques, which anthropologists now call leveling mechanisms, designed to shut down anybody who started rising above the group. The most beautiful of these, and my favorite fact in this entire story, is a practice called insulting the meat. Here is how it works. A hunter goes out, and after days of failure, finally brings down a large, fat, magnificent animal. He has just fed the entire band. In our world, that man would be a hero. He would post it online. He would be celebrated. Instead, he must walk back into camp and act embarrassed. He is expected to say the animal is pathetic, skinny, barely worth carrying. And everyone else joins in. They mock the kill. They complain that they have been dragged all this way for a bag of bones. They insult the meat loudly while cheerfully eating it. Everybody knows the animal is excellent. The insults are a performance, delivered with grins, and the hunter is not really offended. But underneath the joking is something deadly serious. Lee's work, and that of researchers who followed him, explains exactly why they do it. If a great hunter is praised, he might start to believe he is more important than the others. Worse, he might start to feel that the group owes him something. And the moment one person can say, "You owe me," equality is over. Debt is the seed of hierarchy. So the insults exist to stop that seed from ever germinating. They keep the most successful person in the band firmly at everyone else's level. And that was only one tool. There was also something called demand sharing. In our society, if you walk up to someone and ask them to hand over their possessions, you are being rude. Among the Juhuanzi, it was completely normal. You could simply ask, and the expectation was that you would receive. Refusing was the offense. Someone who would not share was labeled stingy or, in one translation, far-hearted. And the pressure to give could be relentless, pushing a person to give until it genuinely hurt. If they still refused, the group could turn on them, mock them, or shut them out. Among the Mbuti of the Congo, the community could punish an antisocial person by refusing to share with them, which in that world was close to a death sentence. Think about what this actually means. These societies had built a kind of immune system against inequality. The moment wealth started to concentrate in one person, social antibodies swarmed it, with ridicule, with demands, with shame, until it dissolved back into the group. So who was the richest person in that world? Not the man with the most possessions. The evidence points somewhere far more interesting. Since you could not store meat in a container, our ancestors did something cleverer. They stored it in other people. Anthropologists describe this as building up a store of social obligations. You give away your surplus today, generously and publicly, and in doing so you plant a quiet claim on everyone who ate. When your hunt fails next month, and it will, they feed you. Under those conditions, the richest human alive was not the one who accumulated the most. It was the one who had given away the most, to the most people, over the longest time. Their wealth was not in a pile. It was distributed across the bellies of everyone they knew. Generosity was the bank account. And this system was not fragile. It lasted, in various forms, for the overwhelming majority of human existence. So what finally broke it? Storage. And then farming. The moment humans could reliably preserve food, dry it, seal it in jars, keep it in a granary, everything changed. Suddenly, the harvest did not have to be eaten before it rotted. It could sit there, holding its value, for months. And for the first time in history, you could have more than you needed, next year and the year after that. Once surplus could be stored, it could be counted, guarded, inherited, and denied. Land became something you could hold and pass to your children. Animals became living, breeding wealth. The old leveling system, built for a world where nothing lasted, suddenly had nothing to grip. But here is a detail most people get wrong, and it comes from one of the biggest studies ever done on this question. In 2025, a team of 27 researchers led by the archaeologist Tim Kohler of Washington State University published work in the journal PNAS analyzing more than 47,000 houses across 1,100 archaeological sites worldwide. They used house size as a measure of wealth on the simple logic that bigger homes mean richer owners. And what they found is that inequality did not explode the instant farming arrived. On average, wealth inequality only began climbing meaningfully around 1,500 years after agriculture began in a given region. It grew slowly, driven by rising populations, competition over limited land, and the emergence of settlement hierarchies where some places outranked others. Other researchers have found the same pattern from a different angle. For a long time, human groups repeatedly flirted with inequality and then slid back into equality again. The old instincts kept fighting back. Inequality had to be tried and abandoned and tried again over thousands of years before it finally became permanent. So there is no single first rich person we can name. What there is a long, slow struggle in which the human immune system against hoarding was gradually overwhelmed. And by around 6,500 years ago, at a cemetery in Varna in modern Bulgaria, we can see the fight had been lost. In one grave, a man was buried with more gold than had ever been found anywhere in the world up to that point: necklaces, bracelets, ornaments, an axe with a gold-wrapped handle. Others nearby were buried with almost nothing. That is the moment made visible. Not just a rich man, but a rich man being publicly honored for it, with the whole community's permission. The insults had stopped. The leveling had failed. Someone was allowed to be above everyone else, and everyone accepted it. Which brings us to you. You live in a world with billionaires. Wealth gaps larger than anything our species has ever seen. And it feels normal, because it is all any of us has ever known. But notice something. When you hear about somebody hoarding an absurd amount of wealth while others struggle, something in you reacts. A flash of irritation, of unfairness, of that is too much. That reaction is often dismissed as envy. I think it is something older and stranger than that. It is the same instinct that made a Kalahari hunter mock a fat antelope. It is the leveling mechanism, 300,000 years old, firing inside a modern brain. Your ancestors survived because nobody was allowed to have everything while others had nothing. That rule kept the group alive through droughts, failed hunts, and hard winters. It is written into you at a level far deeper than economics. So who was the richest ancient human? For almost all of our history, the answer is nobody. And that was not a failure of their society. That was the design.